second, the evening news was playing softly. The next, silence. I looked up and saw my son-in-law standing there with the remote in his hand. "Go to your room, old woman," he said. "I have the game on now. This living room is mine." My name is Ruth Calder. I am 68 years old, and that sentence ended 4 years of quiet endurance. Behind him stood my daughter Allison. She was holding grocery bags, her arms tense, her eyes fixed on the floor. She did not say a word. I waited, not for an apology, just one sentence would have been enough. "Mom, this is your house. Do not talk to her like that." But Allison stayed silent. That silence hurt more than his words ever could. I stood up slowly. My knees protested like they always do. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached for my keys on the side table. Brian smirked. "Taking a walk, Ruth, do not get lost at your age." I did not answer. For 4 years I had made myself smaller in my own home. I ate after them. I watched television with headphones. I learned how to disappear so there would be peace. And in one careless sentence he showed me exactly what that peace was worth. I walked past him, past my daughter, past the couch I paid for and the walls I still owned. At the front door I paused, not to look back, just to breathe. Then I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. I did not know it yet, but that was the moment everything changed. 4 years earlier this house had been quiet. After my husband passed away, the rooms felt too large for one person. The silence pressed in at night. When my daughter Allison asked if she and her husband could stay for a while, I said yes without hesitation. "Just until we get back on our feet," she promised. At first it felt right. I cooked real dinners again. The lights stayed on later. I told myself this was what family was supposed to do. Then small changes began. They took the master bedroom because Brian said his back needed the space. I moved into the smaller room without complaint. I told myself it was temporary. Brian worked from home, so the living room became his office during the day. Conference calls. Screens everywhere. I started eating lunch quietly in the kitchen. Bills went up. Utilities doubled. Groceries disappeared faster. Brian laughed and said prices were crazy these days. I paid everything and said nothing. I began waiting. Waiting to use my own washing machine, waiting to watch my shows, waiting for the right moment to speak that never came. When friends called, I lowered my voice. When I watched television, I wore headphones so I would not disturb Brian. When I baked pies, I cut the edges for myself and left the center untouched because Brian liked it best. Allison changed too. She used to sit beside me and talk. Now she floated between rooms, smoothing things over. If Brian snapped, she explained he was stressed. If I looked tired, she said it would pass. I told myself this was normal, that families adjust, that being patient was the same as being loving. But patience slowly turned into something else. I was no longer the owner of the house. I was the background noise, the furniture, the woman who paid the bills and stayed out of the way. Somewhere along the line I stopped being Ruth Calder and became simply Mom. And then not even that. Just someone who should go to her room when told. What stayed with me after that night was not Brian's voice. It was Allison's silence. If he had shouted alone, I could have dismissed it as cruelty. People can be cruel when they feel entitled. But my daughter stood there and said nothing. She did not look at him. She did not look at me. She adjusted the grocery bags as if something inside had shifted. That small movement told me everything. I realized I had been waiting for her to protect me the way I once protected her. From scraped knees, from broken hearts, from people who spoke too loudly and thought they were right. But children grow up. And sometimes they choose comfort over courage. I thought back to the first year they moved in. Brian made jokes about the house being old-fashioned. He laughed about how things should be modernized. I laughed along so it would not feel like criticism. Allison had smiled nervously then too. Every time Brian crossed a line, I looked to her. Every time she looked away, I told myself she was tired, that she was stuck in the middle, that love meant understanding. But silence is not neutral. Silence takes sides. Standing there in my own living room, I felt something settle inside me, not anger, not sadness, something clearer. I understood that I could stay and continue shrinking, or I could step out and see what was left of me when I stopped explaining myself. For years I had believed that keeping peace meant swallowing my voice. That night I learned the truth. Peace that requires your disappearance is not peace at all. It is surrender. And I was done surrendering. I did not go to my room that night. I went to my dresser. There is a bottom drawer most people never notice. It sticks a little. Inside it, I keep the things that do not change when people do. Paper. For 35 years, I worked as a clerk in the county records office. Deeds, titles, property transfers. I learned early that feelings come and go, but documents stay exactly where you put them. I opened a leather folder and slid my fingers between the pages. There it was. The deed to the house. My name printed clearly at the top. Ruth Calder, sole owner. The edges were yellowed, but the ink was firm. It did not care who slept in the master bedroom or who watched the television. It cared only about the law. I looked at myself in the mirror. Short gray hair, glasses on a chain. A woman most people mistake for harmless. That assumption had kept the house peaceful for a while. But peace built on silence always collects interest. I thought about how many parents I had seen over the years give away property too early, out of love, out of fear, out of a desire not to rock the boat. Then they sat in offices like mine, asking if they could take it back. The answer was almost always no. I closed the folder and placed it back in the drawer. In that moment, I understood something simple and powerful. I did not need to argue. I did not need to convince anyone. I already had everything I needed. I just had to stop pretending I did not. I did not pack a bag. I did not leave a note. I simply put the folder back in the drawer, slipped my keys into my pocket, and walked out of the bedroom. Brian was already on the couch with the game on full volume. Allison was in the kitchen clattering dishes a little too loudly. No one looked up. I crossed the living room slowly. My footsteps sounded louder than they ever had before. Brian glanced over his shoulder and smirked, taking a stroll. Ruth, do not get lost. I kept walking. At the front door, I stopped and rested my hand on the handle. For a moment, I looked around the house. The picture on the wall I had chosen. The rug I vacuumed every Saturday. The space that had slowly stopped feeling like mine. Then I opened the door and stepped outside. The air felt cooler, cleaner. I locked the door from the outside and walked down the path without rushing. At the curb, a taxi pulled up. The driver leaned out and asked where to. Downtown hotel, I said. As the car pulled away, I felt my hands trembling slightly, not from fear. From clarity? I did not know how the night would end. I did not know how angry Brian would be when he realized I was gone. But for the first time in years, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer staying where I was not respected. And that decision felt heavier and lighter at the same time. The hotel room was quiet in a way my house had not been for years. I set my purse on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to my own breathing. After a few minutes, I took out my phone and scrolled to a name I had not called in a long time. Daniel Foster. We used to work in the same building years ago. I handled records. He handled property disputes. He knew how I thought. He answered on the second ring. Ruth, it is late. Is everything all right? I am safe, I said, but I need help. There was a pause, the kind that means someone is listening closely. Tell me what happened. I told him only the facts, no emotions, no history, just the sentence Brian had spoken and the silence that followed. Go to your room, old woman. This living room is mine now. Another pause, then a slow exhale. Do you own the house? Yes. Is there a lease? No. How long have they lived there? 4 years. He did not interrupt. Once when I finished, he said quietly, then, this is simple. Simple did not mean painless, but it meant clear. He explained my options slowly: termination of permission to stay, a formal notice 30 days, to vacate, no arguments, no shouting, just paper and deadlines. I want to proceed, I said. Good, he replied, then we do this correctly. He told me he would prepare the notice that night. His junior associate Mark Caldwell would serve it in person the next morning. Professional, calm, direct. Before we ended the call, he said something I did not expect. Ruth, this is not revenge. I know, I said. This is boundary enforcement. Exactly. When I hung up, I sat there for a moment holding the phone in my hand. For years I had tried to fix the problem with patience and explanations. It turned out all I needed was clarity and a signature. I lay down and slept better than I had in months. Because for the first time the situation was no longer emotional. It was lawful. And that changed everything. I woke up early the next morning before the alarm. The city outside the hotel window was already moving. Cars, footsteps, people going to work, life continuing without asking anyone for permission. I dressed slowly and made myself a cup of coffee. Then I opened my phone. There were 3 accounts in my name that paid for everything in that house: internet, cable television, and a supplementary debit card Allison used for groceries and small expenses. For years I had told myself it was easier to keep paying than to explain. That morning I chose easier in a different way. I called the service provider first. "I am the account holder," I said calmly. "I would like to suspend services at this address effective today." The operator read a short warning about inconvenience. I agreed. Next I called the bank. I asked them to freeze the supplementary card and lower online limits. The woman on the line confirmed the changes without emotion. That was it. No yelling, no threats, no dramatic speeches. Just decisions. Some people call that punishment. I call it consequences. If Brian wanted internet, he could set it up himself. If he wanted television, he could pay for it. If Allison needed groceries, she could use her own card. None of these things were emergencies. They were comforts I had been providing long after appreciation disappeared. I sat back in the chair and waited. Less than an hour later, my phone vibrated. A message from the bank. Transaction declined. Another followed almost immediately. "Why is the card not working? Call me now. Brian." I did not reply. For the first time I understood something important. When people depend on your resources but disrespect your presence, they believe those resources belong to them. Removing access is not cruelty. It is clarity. The meeting took place the following morning at Daniel Foster's office. The room was quiet and neutral. A long table, 3 chairs on one side, 2 on the other, papers stacked neatly in folders. Brian arrived first. He looked tired. His shirt was wrinkled. His confidence was loud but thin, like something stretched too far. Allison followed him inside. She did not sit close to him. She kept her purse on her lap and her eyes on the table. Daniel nodded politely and asked everyone to be seated. Brian did not wait. "This is ridiculous," he said, raising his voice. "We have lived in that house for years. We have rights." Daniel looked at him calmly. "Rights are exactly why we are here." I opened my folder and placed the deed on the table. I did not slide it dramatically. I simply laid it flat. Brian glanced at it and laughed. "You cannot just throw us out like this." "I can," I said quietly, "and I am." Daniel spoke next. "The property is solely owned by Ruth Calder. There is no lease, no rent agreement, no shared ownership. The notice has been properly served." Brian leaned back, crossing his arms. "This is harassment. She cut off the internet. She froze accounts. Emotional distress." "Internet is not a basic necessity," Daniel replied. "If you wish to have it, you may contract it yourself." Brian turned to Allison. Tell her this is wrong." Allison did not speak. I took another folder from my bag and placed it beside the deed. "You said you were saving," I said calmly. "You said the reason you needed to stay was to build something of your own." Brian stiffened. "What is this?" "Statements," I replied. "Loan notices, margin calls." Daniel opened the folder and handed the papers to Allison. Her fingers shook as she read. The room grew very still. "This says 0, she whispered, then less than 0. I nodded. "You did not save, you lost, and you used my money to do it." Brian stood up abruptly. "I would have fixed it. The market turns. You old people never understand timing." I looked at him steadily. "You told me to go to my room so you could lose louder." Daniel cleared his throat. "The deadline remains 30 days. After that, enforcement begins." Brian sat down slowly, as if something inside him had collapsed. Allison covered her mouth. Tears slid down, but she did not wipe them away. I leaned forward just slightly and spoke to my daughter, not to him. "This is your moment," I said softly. "You can keep protecting the story, or you can look at the facts." No one interrupted. For the first time in that room, no one raised their voice. The truth did not need volume. It was already loud and enough. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse or insult. I turned toward my daughter and spoke as calmly as I ever had. Allison, I said, if your marriage only survives because of my house and my money, then it is not a marriage. Brian scoffed, but I did not look at him. It is a dependency, I continued, and you are the one paying the price. Allison's hands tightened around her purse. He says, if we leave, he will file for divorce, she whispered. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. I leaned forward and covered her hands gently. Then let him, I said softly. A man who stays only for square footage and utilities is not choosing you. She pulled her hands away as if the truth burned. You have changed, she said, old and cruel. I shook my head slowly. No, I have become clear. I straightened my back. For 30 days you may stay, and prepare to leave. After that the house will be empty, utilities will not return, cards will remain frozen, there will be no arguments and no exceptions. Brian slammed his palm on the table. You are tearing this family apart. I met his eyes calmly. No, I am ending the hostage situation. Daniel cleared his throat, signaling the end of the discussion. I stood up. This is not revenge, I said, this is order. I gathered my papers and placed them back into my bag. To Allison I said, one last thing. You are 40 years old, you work, you are capable, you do not need permission to stand on your own feet. The room was silent again. But this time the silence did not belong to fear. It belonged to choice. I was not at the house on the 30th day. That was intentional. I had learned that some endings do not need an audience. They only need completion. Daniel's associate Mark arrived early with the paperwork and the inventory list. A moving truck was already parked at the curb when he called me. They are packing now, he said. It is proceeding without incident. Good, I replied. I will remain available by phone. I spent the morning somewhere quiet, a place with warm light and no raised voices. I did not check the time. At a little after noon my phone vibrated once. Keys returned, locks intact, inventory complete, they are gone. Just like that. No shouting, no final insults, no dramatic goodbye. A fact. When I returned to the house later that afternoon, I paused at the gate. The air felt different, as if the place itself had been holding its breath. Inside the living room was bare, marks on the floor where furniture had stood. Small holes in the wall from mounts that never belonged to me. I opened every window. A clean draft moved through the house, carrying out the stale air of arguments and entitlement. I filled a bucket with warm water and soap and began with the floor. Slow, steady movements. By evening the house was quiet again, not empty. Peaceful. For the first time in 4 years the silence felt like mine. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Not because nothing happened, but because I no longer reacted to everything. Allison called me 3 days after they moved out. Her voice sounded different, not calmer exactly, just steadier. I found a small studio, she said. It is not fancy, the ceiling is low and the upstairs neighbor plays loud music, but it is mine. I told her that was a good beginning. She started working full-time. She opened her own account. She sold the car that had drained more money than it was worth. A week later she told me she had filed for divorce. I did not celebrate. I did not say I told you so. I simply listened. Brian sent one message, then another, then none at all. When the house stopped feeding him, he lost interest. That is a pattern I have seen before. Allison came by once in the afternoon. She knocked and waited like a guest. We had tea at the kitchen table. She did not ask to stay. She did not mention money. Before she left, she looked around the living room and smiled faintly. It feels lighter, she said. It is lighter, I replied, because nothing here is pretending anymore. When she left, I sat alone in the quiet. There was no guilt in me. Only relief. Because helping someone grow is very different from helping them hide. And I had finally learned the difference. If you are listening to this and something feels familiar, let me speak to you directly. Helping family is not a mistake. But helping without limits slowly turns love into obligation. When someone lives in your home without contributing, respect becomes optional in their mind. And the moment respect becomes optional, it will eventually disappear. Silence is not kindness. Silence teaches people how far they can go. I stayed quiet because I believed patience would protect peace, What it really protected was someone else's comfort at the cost of my dignity. Paper matters. Love does not replace deeds, titles, and boundaries. If something is yours, keep it that way until you are truly ready to give it away. Not because someone pressures you, not because you are afraid they will be angry. Anger passes. Loss of control does not. You do not need to shout to be strong. You do not need to punish to be firm. You only need to be clear and consistent. Turning off access is not cruelty when access was never a right. And saying no is not the same as abandoning someone. Sometimes no is the first honest thing you have said in years. If you are sitting in your own living room feeling like a guest, ask yourself one question. Who is this peace really serving? Because peace that costs you your voice is not peace. It is payment. And you deserve better than that. That evening I sat alone in the living room. The same room where I had once been told to leave. The couch was back where I liked it. The windows were open just enough to let in the evening air. The house smelled clean and calm. The remote control rested on the table beside me. I picked it up and turned on the television. Soft music filled the room. I adjusted the volume slowly until it felt right. Not too loud, not too quiet. Enough. For the first time in years, there were no footsteps behind me, no hand reaching for the remote, no voice reminding me to make myself smaller. I realized then that ownership is not only about property. It is about choosing who sits at your table, how loud the world is allowed to be, and when silence is welcome. I am still a mother, I am still kind. But I am no longer available for disrespect disguised as family. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to pause for a moment and think about your own boundaries. If you found value here, please like the video, share it with someone who may need to hear it, and tell me in the comments which city you are watching from. Your stories matter too. Thank you for listening.